Quantum leaders, the visionary. Oscillation between strong and weak forces. The visionary's natural style as a big-picture thinker is inherently quantum. Abstract concepts and interlinked systems require oscillation between concrete synthesis and subtle intuition. The strong force manifests in moments of bold conceptual framing, while the weak force emerges as sensitivity to nuance, emerging patterns, and interconnected meaning. The visionary does not settle in either polarity. They ride the wave between the known and the not yet seen. With a motivation direction of towards, the visionary is propelled by goals, future constructs, and imagined worlds. But their greatest breakthroughs occur not through linear pursuit, but by alternating between visionary propulsion and reflective incubation. The future is not forged by force alone. It requires cycles of outward action and inward receptivity. Oscillating between these poles keeps their trajectory adaptive, not dogmatic. The visionary's attention focus is on others, particularly the collective, society, and generational futures. This outward projection requires frequent inward recalibration. The strong force externalizes through social influence and narrative impact. The weak force gathers subtle emotional data, cultural intuition, and collective needs. When the visionary oscillates between broadcasting and absorbing, they become not just a speaker of visions, but a vessel for them. With an internal frame of reference, visionaries source insight from within. Their intuitive authority is a strong force, anchored, determined, self-generated. But its efficacy increases when oscillated with openness to subtle, non-linear impressions, dreams, synchronicities, somatic cues. The visionary's inner compass gains accuracy not through fixed certainty, but through dynamic responsiveness to what surfaces from their deeper unconscious. Their operational style of options mirrors quantum oscillation perfectly. Refusing rigid paths, visionaries pivot fluidly between structures and chaos, between defined strategy and spontaneous innovation. Each option they consider opens new probability fields, strengthened not by certainty, but by willingness to oscillate between structure and flux. Their ability to delay closure keeps doors open longer than most can tolerate. The general viewpoint of the visionary, preferring themes over details, naturally lends itself to oscillation between macro coding, strong force, and wide perceptual openness, weak force. They speak in archetypes, paradigms, metaphors, yet must return regularly to anchor in relevance, adjusting their frameworks through soft feedback. It is the oscillation between symbolic scope and human resonance that keeps their language transformational. In work preference, they thrive in proximity to aligned minds. This dynamic thrives when the visionary oscillates between collaborative fusion, strong force of energetic presence, and solo visionary processing, weak force of interior integration. Rather than constant collaboration, they expand their clarity when they move in and out of relational synergy, allowing periods of energetic withdrawal to refine what emerged in dialogue. Their emotional engagement is deeply associated, fully merged with their vision and process. This high-charge involvement functions best when oscillated with periodic detachment. The strong emotional force fuels commitment and charisma. The weak force allows for reflection, depersonalization, and strategic adjustment. By oscillating between immersion and objectivity, visionaries protect their vitality while maintaining visionary intensity. With a mismatcher approach style, visionaries reject the status quo and favor unique angles. This is where oscillation becomes a superpower. They test disruptive alternatives, strong force, but also tune into what softly resists change, weak force. Their genius lies in shifting between radical rebellion and subtle refinement. Oscillating between what must be broken and what must be evolved gives them long-range staying power. Their through-time orientation makes them architects of the future. Yet even structured timelines require quantum softness. Phases of acceleration, strong force, must be counterbalanced by adaptive slowing, weak force. Visionaries stretch across time because they know not all movement is forward. Some of it spirals, some of it waits. Their temporal intelligence lies in reading timing as vibration, not schedule. And finally, their primary drive, ideas, is the very dance of quantum oscillation. Ideas emerge from the tension between opposing forces, chaos and clarity, dream and definition, solitude and collaboration. The visionary channels this oscillation not as conflict, but as rhythm. Their creative field is quantum, Everything lives in potential until called forth by timing, insight, and oscillatory mastery. Quantum leaders, the visionary, dynamic equilibrium as nature's core design. The visionary's natural style thrives in abstraction, synthesis, and ideation, but true mastery arises when these elevated faculties operate within a dynamic equilibrium. Rather than oscillate endlessly between possibility and overwhelm, the visionary begins to stabilize, balancing innovation with integration. Ideas do not just multiply, they begin to crystallize into structured frameworks. Nature's equilibrium is mirrored in their capacity to hold vast, complex systems in harmony without collapsing into chaos or rigidity. With a motivation direction of towards, the visionary constantly seeks the horizon. Yet dynamic equilibrium teaches that sustainable forward movement requires counterbalance, intentional grounding, rest, and reflection. Visionary ambition, when not stabilized, becomes volatility. To sustain long arcs of change, they must pace their forward motion with energetic restitution, goal-setting counterbalanced by system-stabilizing rituals. The attention focus on others is profound, but if it tilts too far outward, the visionary may lose personal calibration. Dynamic equilibrium invites a mutual exchange. Attention flows outward to inspire change, and inward to ensure emotional attunement and inner coherence. The visionary becomes a mirror for the collective only when they remain clear within themselves. This bidirectional awareness keeps their impact resonant and rooted. With an internal frame of reference, the visionary draws from within, but equilibrium requires them to ensure their insights land meaningfully in the outer world. Ideas formed in solitude must be tested against external reality, feedback, and resistance. Nature doesn't isolate forces. It integrates them in dynamic relationship. The visionary's intuition finds its fullest expression when harmonized with the ecosystem it seeks to change. Their operational style, fluid and option-based, finds power not in perpetual divergence, but in conscious convergence. Dynamic equilibrium invites commitment without rigidity, an ability to stabilize long enough to implement, then reconfigure without destabilizing. True innovation is not the endless pursuit of novelty, but the elegant tension between freedom and form. This principle tempers the visionary's restlessness with anchored purpose. In a general viewpoint, the visionary sees systems and themes, yet equilibrium insists that the macro must serve the micro. Concepts must meet context. Philosophy must translate into policy. The visionary's power amplifies when they regularly anchor grand visions into real-world touchpoints. Holding this tension between cosmic scope and tangible relevance is the heart of visionary leadership in equilibrium. The work preference for proximity requires balance between energetic alignment and over-identification. Working closely with a core team can either amplify coherence or blur boundaries. Dynamic equilibrium allows the visionary to remain individuated within the collective, co-creating while maintaining sovereign insight. They learn when to blend and when to separate, when to influence and when to allow. Their emotional engagement, which is deeply associated, finds sustainability only when modulated. Passion is vital, but equilibrium teaches emotional pacing. To stay deeply engaged without burning out, the visionary must stabilize their emotional field through inner anchoring, physical grounding, and periodic detachment. True visionary longevity comes from a regulated nervous system, not constant intensity. As a mismatcher, the visionary questions norms and dismantles assumptions, but equilibrium prevents them from destabilizing for its own sake. Nature evolves not through destruction alone, but through adaptive restructuring. When the visionary questions within a framework of constructive balance, they catalyze meaningful disruption without losing systemic integrity. Finally, the through-time orientation aligns beautifully with dynamic equilibrium. The visionary sees timelines, trajectories, and the architecture of evolution. But now that long view includes rhythm, restoration, and systemic pacing. Just as ecosystems regenerate through cycles, the visionary begins to lead not just through ideas, but through temporal design, creating futures that are not only brilliant, but balanced. And with a primary drive of ideas, the visionary learns that true ideation is not about endless proliferation. It is about harmonic patterning. An idea becomes powerful not when it is new, but when it finds equilibrium within a greater system. This is visionary leadership not as firework, but as ecosystem. Quantum leaders, the visionary, observer effect, and the collapse of possibility. The visionary's natural style, thriving on abstract systems and interconnected concepts, acts as a quantum lens through which potential realities are perceived. The observer effect shows that by merely focusing attention on a potential future, the visionary collapses it from probability into actuality. Their big picture mind doesn't just predict the future, it shapes it. Every mental model, theory, or possibility they entertain begins influencing its own manifestation. A motivation direction of towards amplifies this phenomenon. The visionary's clarity of intent functions like quantum measurement. It defines the trajectory of reality. However, they must also be mindful that the act of observing a desired future can unintentionally collapse other, possibly more aligned outcomes. Their power lies in observing without attachment, holding multiple futures lightly, allowing the most resonant one to crystallize without premature force. The attention focus on others becomes catalytic under this principle. When the visionary sees latent potential in a community, a movement, or a person, that very attention reshapes the observed. Their visionary gaze becomes participatory, but the effect intensifies with precision. If they project outdated fears or unmet expectations, they unintentionally reinforce limitation. Mastery lies in directing their attention toward emergence, not deficiency. Their internal frame of reference becomes a sacred tool in collapsing possibilities. Since they trust their own insight, their focused belief can act as a blueprint for materialization. But quantum reality warns against self-reinforcing loops. If they mistake subjective clarity for universal truth, they risk collapsing potentials prematurely. Their inner compass must be refined through conscious calibration, constant self-witnessing to ensure their projections are clean. With an operational style of options, visionaries remain open to possibility, but now they must understand that observation itself limits infinite options. Even choosing to explore an idea subtly alters the field. The most visionary leaders know when to look and when to wait, when to define and when to float. Their magic lies in the deliberate timing of observation, knowing that reality solidifies under the gaze. Their general viewpoint, favoring frameworks over details, allows them to observe trends before others even detect patterns. But this power can collapse prematurely if they apply a rigid mental frame to dynamic systems. Visionaries must wield their broad lens as an invitation to emergence, not as a fixative conclusion. Their view must breathe, offering coherence without constriction. In proximity-based work dynamics, the visionary's presence becomes a field of quantum collapse. Their close collaborators unconsciously shape themselves under the visionary's focused awareness. This effect must be wielded ethically, intentionally creating environments where others can step into expanded roles, not conform to unseen pressures. Leadership becomes less about direction and more about presence. Their associated emotional engagement intensifies the observer effect. Because they are so emotionally merged with their vision, their attention becomes charged. When infused with hope, belief, and resonance, they become accelerators of manifestation. But when colored by fear or desperation, even unconsciously, their observation can distort or diminish possibility. Awareness of this emotional charge is essential to harnessing clean collapse. As a mismatcher, the visionary naturally disrupts dominant patterns, but under the quantum lens, even their defiance becomes an observation that reshapes reality. Each challenge they pose sends a wave through the field. The task is no longer just questioning the status quo, but observing it with new intent, aware that disruption is a form of creation, not just destruction. Their through-time orientation provides the ideal scaffold for conscious collapsing. They see potential futures and timelines before others do, but with that foresight comes responsibility. Each imagined future, once seen and shared, changes the field of possibility. True mastery lies not just in envisioning, but in consciously selecting which visions are nourished by observation and which are allowed to dissolve in potential. With ideas as their primary drive, visionaries must learn that every idea they focus on is a signal to the quantum field, a call to collapse, a choice among infinite realities. The greatest leaders understand this and observe with precision, humility, and deep reverence for the unseen.